Dirty Moderates, we at this program, as my loyal listeners know, we call it as we see it. We play it as it lays, and we don't bullshit you. One of the freedoms, I think, no pun intended for this podcast, but obviously one of the joys of doing this is being able to discourse with all types of people, some who I agree with, some who I don't disagree with, somewhere in, and people somewhere in between. But the thing that I think is very important is that when we get out of these boxes that our political polarization has placed us in America and in other parts of the West, we learn from each other, and we do that. And I'm here not to be a shock jock, but to say, hey, maybe you ought to think of things a different way. My guest today is a perfect person, a person who exemplifies what I'm talking about, but the kind of person who many people on the left might not expect to hear from. As a young girl born in Canada to a very strict Islamic household. And yes, it was a strict Islamic household. That's okay to say. Okay, we're not Islamophobic. We're just calling as we said, and she's going to tell you it all. If she missed a word of her Koran reading, she was beat until her feet were bloody and raw. The Canadian government told her there was nothing they could do because, quote, this is your culture, they smugly told her. Yasmine Mohammed is my guest. This is her story, not mine, and I'm going to turn it over to her. But I first want to welcome you, Yasmine, to Dirty Moderate.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Adam. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I mean, being a moderate in this day and age is, really brave and impressive and rare. And I'm really grateful to be able to have a conversation with you because I, like you, believe that, there's nuanced conversations to be had that nobody is having because everybody is so busy taking, an extremist stance on either the right or the left. And, that kind of tribalism just shuts your brain down.
Yeah. And unfortunately, and that's why I want to dive into with you, taking positions that, in sort of the abstract or even spiritual, non-religious sense, consign a lot of people to horrors and tyranny and oppression in ways that they may not think they're doing because they're sticking up for one kind of pseudo-ism or theory that's abstract to them. I'm talking about mainly the left here that, aids and abets movements in the name of resistance that do horrible things to people. And then this is not new to the left. I mean, it took the left a long time to admit Stalin had gulags, that Mao's Little Red Book was a murderous book, that Pol Pot did what he did in Cambodia. I mean, it's that Idi Amin was a mass murderer, that the UN Third World Bloc, which is still there, does everything it can to thwart democracy and freedom unless they're beating up on Israel, the United States, then they're freedom fighters, as you know. But I want to start, first of all, Yasmine's book, Unveiled, How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. I want to start, the thing that got me interested in you, I did a deep dive, so doing all my guests, but the thing that stuck out to me most was the Bill Maher episode, because I'm a huge Bill Maher fan, and I'm watching this, and I'm going to explain it so then you can take it from here. Watching famously about 10 years ago, Bill Maher had the neuroscientist and atheist thinker Sam Harris, who I love, on with Ben Affleck. And they were trying to explain, Bill coming also from an atheist side. And I'm pretty agnostic atheist myself, born Jewish, but not a believer. So I'm an equal opportunity offender on all matters of God has the right way. Ben Affleck went into a sanctimonious kind of mouth frothing attack on Bill and Sam for being Islamophobic and calling them racist. And you write about it in the book. And I remember watching this going, my God, this is insane. I mean, this is the hill he's going to die on. I mean, has he spent any time in a world that not that I have, by the way, but my relationship as a Jew to Israel and my long belief in Western democracy and the rule of law and freedom. I mean, these things are incompatible with that. So all that being said, let's start with that. And then we can go back. And I want you to tell everybody about your extraordinary, harrowing, and very courageous journey.
Yeah. So I'll tell you the reason why that episode left such a mark on me was because Bill and Sam were specifically talking about the statistics out of Egypt for people who renounce the religion of Islam, what should happen to them? And the question was, it was Pew Research, and the question was, should people who have renounced Islam be executed? and 86% of respondents said yes, they should be executed. So Bill and Sam were speaking up against the horror of like, there's no freedom of religion, there's no freedom of thought, to the point that they, almost 90% of this country, want to execute people for the crime of freedom of thought. And I felt, as they say, seen and heard. I felt represented, you know, because my mom is from Egypt and I renounced Islam. And so I felt like these two men on HBO are talking about me. And it was so crazy that they were talking about me as if I mattered, you know, like I was important enough for these guys to be talking about my story. And then, like you said, you know, Ben Affleck came running in to play the part of the useful idiot and started telling them that they're gross and they're racist. And he shut down the conversation. And that was really hurtful to me. Like I was so angry and sad and frustrated. And that's what propelled me to write my book, actually, because a lot of the criticism against Sam and Bill, if not most of the criticism against Sam and Bill, I haven't heard anything else other than these are two straight white American men. What right do they have to have these conversations? That was the biggest thing, is these men's immutable characteristics. That's what the problem was. Nobody engaged with the argument itself. How are you going to argue against what they were saying? How are you going to say, oh, no, Bill and Sam, there's not a problem in Egypt. There's not a problem with people wanting, 86% of people wanting, you know, people who've renounced Islam to be killed. Of course, they can't say that. They can't engage with the point that these men were making. They were just attacking them for who they were as human beings. And so that made me feel like, fine, I'm a brown-skinned Arab woman, and I'm going to say the exact same thing as these men. And then that's going to force people to engage with the actual argument, because they can't attack me on my immutable characteristics. But boy, was I wrong. They still have no problem. Yeah, they've got no problem calling me a white supremacist, you know, Islamophobic, racist, xenophobic, blah, 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 you know, whatever, the whole, whatever they can think of, you know, it's all absolute nonsense, and it's meant to silence me. And good luck with that, because I've risked my life to speak out. You know, my family want me dead for speaking out. So your insults on Twitter are not going to silence me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm used to say it was a cognitive dissonance. You know, we've certainly seen it since October 7th. You've seen it again, you know, Queers for Palestine and all these things that make absolutely no sense. But the truth of the matter is, and that's why I want you to tell your story of your being married to a guy from Al Qaeda, of your mom, how you were treated, how you were beaten, what it means to leave the faith, as you call it. You know, it's more than a cognitive dissonance, because you have people who, for some reason, can find common cause and make allyship with really evil people and evil ideas, yet in the name, paradoxically, of justice. It's a fascinating phenomenon. You know, there is the being blinded by identity politics, which is a huge thing. I do think that, and I've always said this, I have no data, that I think far too many white progressives are just guilt-ridden, probably secret racists. No, I do, who probably don't like Islamic people. Whereas I look at it and go, why can't the brown-skinned woman have a better, freer life? Why does she have to be put through this? Don't we all want that? Like I say, hey, I'm a Zionist, but I want a Palestinian state. Okay, so you guys have to choose at some point to want a better life. I mean, you know, it's not all the same thing, but it falls under the same rubric of, you know,
we're all human beings.
You have agency, and look at you have agency, and your agency is what made you, you know, rip the Band-Aid off and change your life and risk your life, and you deserve. It's not even applause. I mean, you deserve our greatest thanks. Those people in the world who've been fortunate, like me, like the many who criticize you, but I'm here to say what you've done is more than noble, because you're speaking up for all these people, millions and millions and millions of people who don't have hope for a better life. So we sound more progressive in a lot of ways, even though I'm a moderate. I can't assign a category to you, but you know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The what is called progressive these days in so many ways are regressive.
Yeah.
And one of those examples is what you just described there, is how they could possibly look at terrorists and the kinds of absolute atrocities that they committed on innocent people, whether they were going to a music festival or whether they were just in their homes. We're talking men, women, children, babies, elderly, unspeakable things that we all know about and I don't even want to repeat right now.
Yeah.
And they can still somehow look at this group and call them freedom fighters and say that's not terrorism, that's resistance, and to find all sorts of excuses and all sorts of justifications. How can you call yourself a progressive?
Yeah.
What is it? What are you progressing towards? Like that's absolutely despicable and inhuman. And
Well, there's a it's a cognitive dissonance, also an intellectual confusion that happens, because what ends up happening, an ideological confusion might be even a better word. The progressive movement grafts American identity politics and especially race relations on a completely different world and a completely different using a completely different mindset, and they apply the same rules.
Yeah.
It makes no sense, but right, it's like, oh well, the Palestinian cause is now the Black Lives Matter cause. Really?
Yeah,
I missed the memo. I didn't get the memo on that. I mean, I really, that's the same cause, because I don't think so. And and the same thing. So brown people therefore are marginalized. Therefore,
exactly.
I'm an
You're all
oppressor.
brown, so it's all the same issue.
Right, as if that's not racist, right? You're all brown, so yeah, you all think the same way. And so, but speaking of that, I do want to get into the
I'll get to my story.
No, I know you will. I just love hashing this stuff out as a rubric for us to be under.
Yeah.
All right, take us from the beginning. And folks, again, the book Unveiled: How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. Yes, it's called Radical Islam for a reason. Yasmine is going to talk about it. Not to keep saying it sometime to people, because, pearl clutching starts. It's like, well, you don't live in the real world, and Yasmine did, and let's do it. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. So my dad was born and raised in Gaza. My mom born and raised in Egypt. Yep. And when he was about 18, Gaza was under Egypt's rule.
Before
and
Israel,
so he could, and so he could go to university in Egypt for free. And so that's what he did. And that's where he met my mom. And then the two of them, after they graduated, they moved to San Francisco. And in San Francisco, they had my sister. And then after a while, they decided they wanted to move to Vancouver, Canada. And that's where my brother and I were born. And that's also where their marriage fell apart. So my dad moved to the other side of Canada, and my mom was left with 3 kids, single mom to 3 kids. And she started looking for just community. She started looking for support. And so she went to the local mosque. It's important to clarify that neither my mom nor my dad were raised in religious households. They were both just like open-minded, secular people. Like, yes, they were Muslim because, that's the community and the culture that they grew up under, but they weren't practicing. But when my mom went to the mosque, she wasn't looking for, religious salvation or anything like that. She wasn't going to pray. She was just looking to maybe find other women that spoke Arabic that she could feel connected with. You know what I mean? Like, she's just feeling alone. She's a single mom to 3 kids in a new country. And unfortunately, that's where she met a man who was living at the mosque at the time, an Egyptian man who was riding this political Islam wave. So political Islam is something that started up after the Islamic regime of Iran in 1979. So once they took over, it started spreading. You might have heard of Muslim Brotherhood, Hezb Tahrir, groups like that. Yeah.
Muslim Brotherhood, they killed Anwar Sadat.
That's correct. Because he wanted peace with Israel.
Yeah. And I always say, give me a Palestinian Anwar Sadat, and I think there could be real progress, but he was killed for it. I mean, an extremist Jew killed Rabin, to be fair, but still, I mean, anyway.
Yeah. And he, so So this was all exactly what you described. So this was all starting all over the Middle East and North Africa, this kind of, just surgence it's pro-Islam and anti-West. It goes hand in hand.
Can I jump in real quick? Because I actually have a question for you. This is important, and I really want to learn. I'm very fascinated by the sort of political nature of Islam. Iran, not only becomes a full-on theocracy after the Shah, but it's a Shiite country. Isn't Egypt a Sunni country?
That's right.
So how does that chasm get bridged in view of political Islam?
Well, yeah, it's like Iran is the one who funded Hamas for October 7th, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So there's a saying in Arabic, it says, my brother against my brother, me and my brother against my cousin, me and my cousin against the foreigners. So what that means is basically Shia and Sunni will get together. They don't care if it's against the Jews, then it's an alliance that they're willing to be friends all of a sudden, right? If they've got a bigger enemy that they both
enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of idea.
Exactly that kind of sentiment.
Okay.
And so when my mom got caught in this ride of Islamization, it started in Egypt. You talked about Anwar Sadat. He was the president of Egypt at the time.
Right.
So Egypt is where the Muslim Brotherhood started. This all happened after World War I, right? It happened after the Ottoman Empire fell. Yes. They all decided, how are we going to spread Islam again without using the sword? The first time we did it through raping and pillaging. We can't do that this time. We have to find another way. And so they actually came up with a 100-year plan where they spelled out exactly how they were going to do it. And they've been following their plan perfectly. And so what they did in Egypt and in everywhere, Tunisia, Algeria, Iraq, Syria, all over the place, Yemen, all over the Middle East and North Africa, they played the same exact game where they acted as if they were the progressives, they were the humanitarians. They did it in Gaza too.
Oh yeah.
And they got people on their side. And then as soon as they had power, that's when the claws came out, right? That's when they started to show how controlling they were and then that's when their terrorism came out, basically. That's when they started to show their true colors. And so that is the ideology of Islamism. It's you stay peaceful and, you play the game until you have enough power. Then once you have enough power, then you can start to wield that power in whatever way you want. But until then, you have to stay quiet and play the game until you have enough of whatever it is. So whether it's whether you have enough of a strong voting block or whatever it is. So my mom got caught up in this, hook, line, and sinker. She became like a born again Muslim. She started going to Al-Azhar University in Egypt, which is like the most prestigious Islamic university, Sunni Islamic university. Her idols were all people like Sayyid Qutb, Hassan al-Banna, like all of the Islamist leaders that really hated the West. And their answer to the West, their answer to democracy, to freedom, to everything Western was Islam. And they said, Islam huwa al-hal, Islam is the answer. And so to all of life's problems, Islam is the answer.
Right.
And so you would have seen, like when my mom grew up in Egypt in the 60s and 70s, everybody would have, she didn't grow up in the 60s and 70s, but before she left in those days, it would have been, people are still, wearing mini skirts, they're living life normally, but it was
secular in a way, like you said. It was people could dress,
open-minded.
Women could, right.
Yeah. Yep. And for my mom to go to university was fine for her, but it wasn't fine for me. Right. So she just it's like the gauntlet fell at that point. It's like, nope, now we're going to be religious. And now I'm going to make up for all of those years that I was irreligious. with you. You're going to be like, you and your brother and your sister are now going to be like my penance. So we had to be extra Muslim so that she could make up for all of her years of not being religious. So her, you know, she thought that she would repent by having the most pious children. And she became the leader of the Islamic studies department at the Islamic school that we were forced to attend. Like, she just totally joined this thing. Like, it's a cult, basically. She joined this cult and she was abducted. Like, couldn't even recognize. Yeah.
Yeah.
Couldn't even recognize my mom anymore, Adam. I have to take it back to the beginning when she first met this man. And he came into our home and everything was forbidden. Everything was haram suddenly, right? So we went, like, suddenly he's like, you're not allowed to ride your bike. You're not allowed to go swimming. You're not allowed to have non-Muslim friends.
Oh.
Like, I used to go down the hallway. We lived in an apartment building and I'd play Barbies with Chelsea and Lindsay every day after school. And now it's like, nope, they're non-Muslims. You're not allowed to go to their house. They're not allowed to come to your house anymore. And he took my mom's records. This was I think this was the point when I realized, like, okay, everything has really changed in my life now. My mom used to love country music. She'd listen to Dolly Parton, Hank Williams, you know, Kenny Rogers. The house always had music playing in it. He sat us down on the carpet and he took my mom's records and he started breaking them. And then he handed the shards to us and he told us to break them too. And I looked up at my mom and I didn't even know who she was anymore. She was just had her head down, looking down at the carpet and letting this man break her stuff, letting this man come into our home and break her stuff. And I just couldn't believe it. You know, I was like, if my brother came into my room and started breaking my toys, I would be livid, but she had no reaction. And that was the beginning of the end, you know, like when I say she was abducted into this cult, that's what I mean. Like, she just disappeared.
Was your mom, here's what I want to ask you, was your mom, obviously, and of course, Islam is not the only one, a lot of the more dogmatic parts of any of the Abrahamic faiths are deeply patriarchal. Islam, especially, Judaism is too, and the far Orthodox. Was your mom, obviously her bowing her head is you have to be completely obsequious to this man, right? That's goes that same. But prior to that, was she a woman who felt empowered? Was she like a forward-thinking woman who believed in feminism, or was she non-political, or where? I mean, in other words, all of a sudden to be you know, almost subservient seems like such a seismic shift. What was she like before?
Huge seismic shift. So I'm going to give you a little inkling of who she was before.
Okay.
When she brought my dad home to her family and said, this is the man I want to marry. Palestinians have a really bad reputation in the Arab world. Arabs are really racist or bigoted towards Palestinians. Okay. Egyptians especially, right?
Who is Palestinian? I missed that. Who is
my dad? My dad is from Gaza.
Oh, from Gaza, right.
Yeah. Okay. And when my mom said she wanted to marry this man, her family basically told her, like, we would rather if you married a garbage man, an Egyptian garbage man, rather than marry a Palestinian. And she's like, he's educated. His family works in Saudi Arabia. They're well-to-do. Like, there's all this, and they're like, who cares? At the end of the day, he's a Palestinian and we do not give you our blessing. And she said, I don't care. I'm going to marry him anyway. So that's who she was. She was somebody who defied her family and who just did what she wanted to do. And she had like belly dancers at the wedding. She didn't even wear a long dress like everybody wears a long dress on their wedding. She had a short little
Where is the wedding exactly? Cairo?
In Egypt. It was in Cairo, Egypt.
Yeah.
And you'd think she looked like a Bond girl. You know what I mean? Like, she was so not subservient whatsoever. She was like such a opinionated, strong woman.
Yeah.
And when they went to San Francisco, She was like, my dad was not the kind of person who, you know, like he wanted her to work. He wanted her to enjoy America as much as he was, you know. They didn't have a good relationship on a personal level. Obviously, that's why they ended up getting a divorce. But he was not the kind, like he wouldn't have married her. You know what I mean? If he was gonna, he knew she was a strong woman, is what I want to say. She was not a subservient woman that he was going to control.
Wow.
But this guy and this ideology, like this political Islam, and it really, I don't know, because I'm just going to give you my own opinion here. But Sayyid Qutb, who is one of the leaders of the Muslim, one of the creators, basically, of the Muslim Brotherhood, one of the godfathers of it. His whole thing was he moved to America. He tells the story transparently. He moved to America. Everybody was dancing. He asked a woman to dance and she said no. And he was so offended and he was so angry. And he was like, these Americans, I hate them all. I hate this country. I'm going back to Egypt. And then it was just like super anti-West. That's his whole thing, is just anti-West.
Right. Like story of Hitler not getting into art school, you know, and he took it out on everybody. There's the theory that if he just got into art school, the world would be different, you know.
We would have been okay. Like, yeah. Right. And so my mom, I think some of that was true too, because when they were in San Francisco, it was the peace, love, and hippie era. You know, this is in the 60s now. And in the late 60s, early 70s. And my dad loved it and she didn't, right? And he was not faithful to her. And so she felt like this, and he was encouraging her to be unfaithful too, right? It was a different time, Adam. You know,
yes, well, and every culture has its own thing. I mean, that doesn't, you know, listen, to go from there for your mother to a place that not only did she, like we said, completely seismically change, but she willingly participated in your abuse. That's a huge, I mean, you know what I mean? It's not like saying, hey, I used to be kind of loose and I go to church now. And you know, that alone is its own journey. This is something else.
It is something else completely. Right. But I meant to make that parallel that I think she had a lot of anti-West sentiment that propelled her into this, just like Sayyid Qutb was propelled into this.
And she got that from where? Just from the world?
From that man. So sorry, I'm jumping all over the place, but that
man who broke your records or broke her records.
That man, yes. She married him. Even though in Canada, it's against the law to have more than one wife, Islamically, a man can have up to 4 wives. So this man was already married. He already had 3 children, but he took my mom on as his second wife. So she was like wife number 2.
Right.
And so the first wife was the legal wife, and my mom was just an Islamic wife. So she didn't have any legal rights or anything, but Islamically, this was her husband. And so that was it. It's like you described. After that, it was, you have to memorize Quran. You have to pray 5 times a day. We got put in hijab. We got sent to it, or my sister and I got put in hijab. We got sent to Islamic schools, and everything completely changed. And I always felt a sense of resentment and sadness and hope that my mom would snap out of it. I just, because I remembered those days beforehand and I wanted those days back. And it's kind of, it's childish, but you'll get it, and your listeners will get it. My sister was 3 years older than me, and she had been allowed to go to sleepovers. She'd been to like a birthday at McDonald's. Do you know what I mean? Like she'd done all of these
I had one
things,
of those. Those are great.
Right? It was like, you're a celebrity if you're going to have a birthday at McDonald's in those days.
Sure.
And she got to do all those things, you know, but I was still little. So I didn't get to go to any sleepovers yet. And this man came into our lives when I was 6 years old. And then he suddenly said, you can't, everything is forbidden. Even birthdays are forbidden, right? Obviously, I'm not going to have a sleepover at my friend's house if I'm not even allowed to see any non-Muslim people or be friends with them anymore.
Right.
And so I was really, and also I was on a tricycle. And the next, I was supposed to learn how to ride a two-wheeler like my big sister. But then suddenly, no, bikes are haram too. You're not allowed to ride a bicycle. And so all of these things that I was looking forward to when I was 6 going on 7 were just like taken away from me.
Yeah.
And so I always yearned for those days back again. And they never came back. My mom never snapped out of it. She just continued to get worse and worse and worse, deeper and deeper and deeper. And you described what happened to me when I was 13 years old. When one of my teachers asked me what was wrong, because he could tell that I was upset. He was my drama teacher, Mr. Fabro. He wrote the foreword for my book.
Wow. Oh yeah. I saw that.
Yeah.
I know you're a drama teacher. Yeah. You a
Yeah,
theater
he was my
person?
drama
I was
teacher.
I was a theater producer. Yeah.
Oh, really? Cool.
My farm for
I
life,
wasn't.
Yes.
I just was, because he was my drama teacher, we were closer than you normally would be in an academic class. And I trusted him and I felt comfortable with him. And I told him what was going on at home. And like you mentioned, it got all the way up to family court. And they told me, this is it. This is your life. This is your culture. There's nothing we can do to help you. So at that point, I started to finally stop resisting. You know, I stopped pining for those days of before I was 6 years old, you know, because I felt like, well, that's it. What else are you going to do? It's the police, child services, the family court. Like, where else am I going to go for help if these guys won't help me? There's nothing else.
No.
And so I gave up. Yeah. But still, I had in me this spirit that my mom hated. You know, I wasn't subservient enough. I asked too many questions. And she just felt that I was not conforming the way she wanted me to conform, even though I did everything. You know, I wore hijab, I went to school and came straight home. Like I did everything, but it wasn't good enough. And once I graduated from high school, we went to Egypt on a family holiday, and I woke up one morning and my whole family was gone. They'd all just left. I was left there in Egypt without my consent or knowledge. And the reason was my mom figured that if I was in an Islamic country, that it would be easier to control me, and I wouldn't be looking towards, you know, liberty and feminism and
Were you left? I'm sorry, you were left in a hotel, in a house?
No, I was left with my mom's twin sister.
Okay. And how old were you? 18, you said?
17. 17. Yeah.
Wow. Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah. And they tried to get me to marry my cousin, and I was able to finagle myself out of that. But at this point now, my mom was really, I mean, she'd been disappointed in me before, but me refusing to marry my cousin was an embarrassment for her. Like she felt like I had really dishonored her in front of the whole family. Everybody knew I was supposed to marry him, and now everybody knew that I was defying her. And so it was like more than she could bear. She was so angry at me. And
I want to highlight a moment that you wrote about in the book. I believe it's in the book. If it isn't, it might be from somewhere else. I read it, but in defiance of your mother in 2004, you removed your hijab, and you were called a filthy prostitute.
Yeah.
Please explain. I mean, obviously it's a horrific thing. Why does that make you a prostitute? What does that mean? I mean, because you're a woman who's who's showing her face. Is that?
Well, in Islam, there's a concept called awra, and awra is like shame.
Okay.
right? Nakedness, basically. And
Right.
so you have to cover your shame. You have to cover your aura. Now, for a woman,
Right.
whether it's her breasts or her hair, it's the same thing. It's considered aura. And so for me to take off my hijab was like, you're just an absolute whore. Like you're just, it's like you're walking around naked right now.
Mm-hmm.
I should tell you as well that a woman's aura extends to her voice. Even her voice is considered aura. So she should not, her voice shouldn't be heard.
And this is obviously, I lived in London for a couple of years, which was wonderful. And obviously it was the first time I'd really lived with a large Islamic population. Some of my neighbors were, and it depended on, everybody was different, but there was a family at the end of the block that were fully covered. I mean, both women were like completely covered. I know there's different levels of covering, right? In other words, were you wearing an entire, what feels like a body? That's not a bodysuit, but it's body hair. Yes.
So when I was 9 years old, I covered everything except for my face and hands. And then when I was married to the Al-Qaeda agent, then or terrorist, whatever, then I was put in niqab, which covered me head to toe in black. I didn't even have a slit for eyes. And I used to have to wear black gloves and black socks that were delivered from Saudi Arabia.
Right. The Al-Qaeda, man, now you, just to sort of give an intro, in the book, you write about how you would sort of reached a point where you thought maybe you could please your mother, and you had almost internalized a lot of this disappointment. And so you meet this guy who she thinks is wonderful, and we learn he's an Al-Qaeda terrorist. Your story is I mean, it's not, I say cinematic, I don't mean it in a sense because it's so, oh wow, let's all watch this movie, but it really is. And it's like a harrowing melodrama, what you live through here. Mm-hmm. So talk about that part of your, what you thought would be a kind of redemption for you in your mother's eyes.
Yeah. So going back to when I first came back from Egypt, had just defied her, wasn't marrying my cousin. And she was so disappointed in me and so angry. And I, like you said, just kind of felt defeated. I felt like, you know what, I'm just going to do what she wants. I'm going to listen to her. I'm going to finally give in, and maybe then she'll actually love me, or at least she'll stop hating me. So there was a lot of, that's one of the parts of the coercion, right? There was also, you're never going to, you're not going to be my daughter. I'm going to disown you. I don't even want you to come to my funeral. I don't want to know you. If you don't marry this man, I'm never going to allow you to go to heaven, because again, in Islam, there's this concept that if the mother is not pleased with the child, then that child can't go to heaven. And so she's like, I will make sure that you burn in hell for eternity, that you will never get to enter heaven if you don't marry this man, blah, blah, blah. So there's like a million different kinds of coercive methods that were being used. But like you said, I genuinely just gave up, and I thought, okay, you know what? Let's just do this her way. And she told me later that she chose this man. She knew he was a terrorist, and she chose him, she said, because he'd be strong enough to control you. So she was just frustrated with me and trying to control me my whole life and sending me to Egypt, and that didn't work. And so she thought, you know what's going to work? A terrorist. He'll keep her in line. And she wasn't wrong. I mean,
how long were you married?
5 years.
Right. And did you have a daughter with him?
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was positive. That was
yes, of course. That's the
joy,
the only positive thing out of it. And she's the reason why I got out, because, in Egypt, there's a very high percentage of women that are victims of female genital mutilation. It's somewhere near the 90%.
Yeah.
Now, luckily, my family are not one of, like, they're of the 10%. But this man's family are of the 90%. And so when my daughter was born, my perfect little baby girl, he leans over and he says, when are we gonna take her to get her cleaned? And I said, what do you mean? She just had a bath. Like, I didn't really understand at first. And he's like, no. When are we going to take her to get her fixed? And then my mom piped up and she said, oh, no. We don't do that when she's a baby. We wait till she's older, like maybe 6 or 7 years old. We'll take her to Egypt and that's when we'll get it done. And that's when I understood what these two were talking about. And so from that moment, I realized, okay, this is a ticking time bomb now. I have to get out of this house. You know, here I am with a high school education and a daughter, but I have to get out, find a way to be able to support us both, get out of this house. I knew it was going to be a dishonor on my family and my mom wouldn't support me and I'd have nothing because, you know, a woman divorced is like so shameful. But I knew I'd have to get out before my daughter was old enough for them to take her to Egypt and get this done to her.
Right. And where are your siblings?
Yeah. So my brother gets to live his life like you wouldn't even know that he was from a Muslim family, right? Like he gets to just, I was the one who wanted to go to college, like desperately wanted to go. But when my grandfather died, my father's father, my brother got all of the inheritance. My sister and I got nothing. And it all went towards tuition for him and he never even finished. He never even graduated.
Right.
So he just got to live his life, do whatever he wanted. He had girlfriends, he had women that he got pregnant. He just, you know, whatever. That's my brother. Cause that's boys. They live a completely different life.
Right.
And my sister, weirdly enough, and this is going to sound really gross and incestuous, but that man that my mom married, remember I told you he had 3 kids?
Yep.
So one of those boys, one of his kids that we grew up with, my sister ended up marrying him. So her son, they were like, it was really gross. It was really shocking for me. But that's the way it was. Cause as far as I was concerned, this guy was like our stepbrother, you know?
Yeah.
But she married him and, she was very much the perfect daughter to my mom. She never pushed, she never questioned, she didn't give her any trouble, opposite of me. So, yeah, that's the 3 of us in a nutshell.
Oh, wow. Now, Yasmine, how did you get away from this Al-Qaeda guy? I mean, I know you got away, but isn't there a sense of search and destroy missions they go on to find you? I mean, isn't it like they don't just let you go? I mean, you know, talk about that heroic act, because I think you write about it, but I want people to hear about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a long series of convoluted events, as you know, because you've read my book. And I often say, if not for the flap of a butterfly's wing, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. Like it was all very just lucky and wonderful people that were able to come into my life at the perfect time to help me. But I'm going to try and make this as concise as possible.
Sure.
So basically, I knew I needed to get out of that house, but I didn't have the courage to get out fast enough. And then I found out that I was pregnant again. And once I found out that I was pregnant the second time, it was like I truly gave up. I was like, well, that's it then. You know, we're moving to Peshawar and I'm going to be a terrorist's wife. Like, what else am I going to do? I can't support 2 kids. And then when I went for an ultrasound, we found out that the baby didn't have a heartbeat. And so they scheduled me in for a D&C, and I went under general anesthetic. And when I went under, the nurse told me, you're going to need someone to help you with your daughter because this general anesthetic can make you groggy. You're not going to be yourself. You're not going to be able to take care of your daughter by yourself. Make sure you have someone there to help you. And I told him, I'm going to need a week to recover. And for a week, I'm going to need someone to help me take care of my daughter. And I knew that he was not going to be like, I'll help. Like he never did anything, never changed a diaper. He has no idea. I knew he'd say, go to your mom's house. Your mom can help you. And that's exactly what he said. And that's exactly what I had hoped for, because I knew that getting out of my mom's house would be easier than getting out of his house.
Right.
And so when I got to my mom's, like I mentioned before, she was the head of the Islamic Studies department at the Islamic school that I had attended. And so I knew the school hours and I knew how long her commute was and everything. And the minute she left the house, I went straight to the Yellow Pages and found a lawyer that I could get to quickly. A lawyer that back in those days, there was something called lawyer referral. And for the first half an hour, you could get a free consultation. And so I had to find a lawyer that was willing to give me a free consultation that day. And it had to be a female lawyer too, because of course I'm head to toe in black. And so I get my daughter and we go to this lawyer, get on the city bus, like a big black Dementor, and walk into the lawyer's office. And I'll never forget. It's so weird how I was just not aware of what I looked like and what was
right. Of course.
But the minute I walked into the office, it's like everybody just like immediately stood to attention and they just like ushered me towards her office. And everybody was like really supportive and helpful because I had said, I need to be out of there quickly because I knew how much time it would take me to get home before my mom got home, blah, blah, blah. And then they realized, oh, wait, this really is an emergency. Like she really does need to get home. And so they were all amazing with like taking all the information that they needed to take. I said, I need full custody. I need a divorce and I need a restraining order. And she was like, I got you. Don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fine. And I was like, you can't call me because these are the days before. Well, I didn't have a cell phone. Some people did, but I didn't. I was like, you can't, this is the number, but you can't call my mom's house. Because what if she picks up, I'll call you to check in. And she's like, don't worry, everything's going to be fine.
Right.
And she said, he'll be served. And you should, if you don't hear back from me in 5 days, then that means he's been served. If he hasn't been, then I'll need you to call me. If after 5 days, you haven't heard from him. So here I am counting down the 5 days. And then like on day 3 or 4, he comes to my mom's apartment building screaming threats to me in Arabic. And I'm just petrified that somebody's going to let him in the door. And then he'll come up to the apartment. But, he's a 6'4" man yelling in Arabic. So nobody opened the door. And actually, when I called 911, I was like, my ex is here. He's screaming at the bottom of the building. And they're like, yeah, we know. We got like 10 calls about it. We're on our way. And I mean, he was so angry. He spoke about me as if I was a possession, a thing that somebody took from him without his permission. Like he was so incensed that what he was screaming was, give me back my wife. That was his thing. And then he was going on about, I'm going to cut your face so no man will ever look at you. You will never be free from me. I will never divorce you. Even on the day of judgment, you will be mine. For the rest of eternity, you will be mine. Because in Islam, a man decides when to divorce a woman. And he's like, your Canadian divorce is meaningless. Islamically, you're still mine. And And that actually, I believed him, because I believed in the religion at that point. And I was like, how am I going to escape him? Because even if I get to live my few decades on earth without him, when he goes to heaven, he gets to decide, according to Islamic scripture, he gets to decide which wife he wants to be with him. And so he will say, he's told me, I'm going to choose you to make you suffer for eternity. And thankfully, he didn't get in the building. The police came up, they talked to me, they explained to me what a restraining order meant. And they explained to me that that means, like, all we can do is say he can't come near this building, basically. Like, do you go to school? No. Do you go to work? No. Okay, well, we can't, there's nothing else we can do. So basically, I was under house arrest. I had to stay in that house because if I left it, I wasn't safe. Now, what I skipped over here was, at some point, my mom had a medical emergency, and an ambulance, I called an ambulance to come pick her up, go to the hospital with her. And I went with her. And when I was in the hospital waiting room, I was approached by two people who were part of CSIS, who were the Canadian Secret Service, Canadian CIA, essentially. And they told me who I was married to. And this is before 9/11, so I didn't even know who bin Laden was, but that was one of the pictures that they were showing me, because I remembered the turban. And as soon as I saw, like, when 9/11 happened, I was like, oh my God, that's that guy. So I knew he was a terrorist, and I knew I needed to get out. And I was, I had found this window of opportunity, and I wasn't going to miss out on getting myself and my daughter out of this house. And I stayed under house arrest in my mom's place until CSIS came again and showed me a picture of him behind bars in Egypt and said, "You're free. You can leave this house now."
So what I want to ask now, because the book is called, Unveiled: How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. Obviously, we're here, 5-6 months after October 7th, which is its own thing, obviously. But going back to what you write about with Sam Harris and Bill Maher, and then Ben Affleck's reaction, and a lot of the, certainly the Western left's continual accommodation of radical Islam, because they're afraid of being called Islamophobic, or they're so busy being woke, they don't think about the abuse and despotism that people really have to live under. I'm going to start with this question. How do Western liberals empower radical Islam? In your mind, I want liberals to hear this, who are listening, from somebody who escaped the brutality of this.
So one of the examples is what we talked about with when I went to court, basically, and I talked about the abuse that was happening in my family, and the judge told me, well, that's your culture, that's your problem. I wouldn't have gotten that treatment if I was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl whose family was from Sweden or Germany, right? I was told that because my family were Muslim. And
you are subjugated because we can't say anything, and you just have to be subjugated.
Exactly. There's that cultural relativism, that moral relativism, where they say, well, and I think a part of it too, it's definitely cultural and moral relativism, but it is also fear, because they're afraid that they're going to have the Muslim community. Terrorism works, right? Terrorism is successful. We know that from Salman Rushdie. We know that from Charlie Hebdo. We know that to keep people in line, you randomly stab people on London Bridge, all these things, it keeps people in line. It makes the societies, bend at the knee. It makes them just spineless. And so that's what they're banking on. And so there's a part of it is the whole, we want to support minorities and blah, blah, but it's also, we're afraid of these minorities and what they're going to do if we don't let them do what they want to do. Right.
And there's political
And
realities, I'm sure, in Canada, as
yes,
they're less
yes,
here, but you even see the Biden reelection campaign desperately worried about Michigan and, the threats of voters there. Meanwhile, if you've been to Dearborn, Michigan, it's no liberal oasis. It's pretty homophobic and restrictive. I mean, even in America, I mean, obviously it's an American city, but in the largest Arab American city, it is hardly a Xanadu of progressive politics. They
no,
joined with the
absolutely
far
not.
right book. A lot of those neighborhood groups and joined with the far right of book banning in Michigan, actually, and tore down pride flags and things like that. So again,
Yes,
it's like a horseshoe theory. It all kind of comes, together ideologically or meets at a certain juncture where, oppression is oppression, hatred is hatred, and not calling out radical Islam for its hatred it does a disservice to so many people who are consigned to it, as you write about.
exactly. Exactly.
What?
And then
Yeah,
back to Dearborn, Michigan, when they
yeah.
were screaming being gay is not okay, and they
Oh
had
yeah.
all of those, if those were Christian fundamentalists,
Oh, you would have the end. Oh, you'd be the end of it. The the news would be covering it. Be the headline story in nightly news. It would be everybody's Twitter. It would be. I know. Wait, it is, and it is a condescension. It's a reverse racism. You think about it. It's like we, in a way, right? We can't condemn a group of people because then somehow we don't like brown people, even if that particular group of people, it is not their immutable characteristics on their face. It's that they are spewing hatred and vile things that are supposedly against what you believe in. So you have to call it out, but they don't. It's that identity first. It's the oppression Olympics. And I've written essays about this. You use the term useful idiots early on, and it comes from the days of the Soviet Union, but that's what it was. It's a kind of ideological subversion that people fall under, not necessarily from the Soviets, but the Soviets midwifed, the Arab resistance during, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, so the Soviet Union created the PLO. That's who
Yep.
created them. And Arafat was an Egyptian. He's not a Palestinian. And
That's
they
correct.
used that to foment hatred and form a political agenda, And so the other thing I want to ask is, because Islam has not had a reformation. Is that fair to say? Like the other faith?
Absolutely fair to say. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you say radical Islam, how much of Islam is radical?
Yeah.
This is a
So
safe space here in the best sense. I mean,
no,
is
yeah.
it like, because I say if there's 1.9 billion Muslims, let's say, okay, and of course you can't say everybody. We don't speak in generalities, but let's say 10%. Well, that's 190 million people. That's a lot of people who want to destroy the world, right? Am I right, wrong? Where am I?
You are correct. Now I have to, if I could write the subtitle for my book, I would write it differently. I think Islam itself does have all these radical ideas. Of course it does, right? But it's like looking at the Old Testament, and some people are going to be Westboro Baptist Church about it. You know what I mean? And then some people are not going to be. So it really it's the people that choose to cherry pick their religion and to say, actually, I'm not going to follow this part or this part. And then there's others who say, yeah, actually, I do want to follow the parts about whatever it is, jihad or beating your wife or sex slavery, or, it's all there. And if you want to follow those edicts, then you have religious justification. You know what I mean? Like nobody can fault you for it, because the creator of the universe has already sanctioned it for you. So Islam in and of itself is it is a political ideology. It's more a political ideology than it is a spiritual religious experience, right? It's all about do's and don'ts. So if anybody cracks open a Quran, they'll see that very much from the beginning. It's all about conquering. It's all about spreading Islam by the sword. It's all about the best of the Muslims are those who give up their lives in the pursuit of spreading Islam across the planet. Those are the martyrs. So, those are the best of Muslims, the ones who will share the highest levels of heaven that only the prophets get to live in. But if you die fi sabilillah, like in the pursuit of spreading Islam, then you will get to be in this highest levels. So the religion is pushing in that direction, right? That's the main impetus of it, is this global caliphate. That's a political ideology.
And that's very real, isn't it? There's definitely
It's very real.
Right.
Yeah. So there are some Muslims, obviously, who don't want to partake in any of that. They're not interested,
Right.
There are some Muslims who want to ignore the verses about, not drinking alcohol or not sleeping around before getting married, or not, or that you can't be gay. You know what I mean? Like they're going to ignore all of these things that they want to ignore if they choose to. So it's the people themselves, the way they practice the religion doesn't necessarily have to be radical. So what I should have said is radical Muslims.
Right.
Right. So
Well,
when we're talking about those people in Dearborn, Michigan, who were
yeah.
screaming being gay is not okay, those are the extremists, those are the radicals, those are the fundamentalists, right? And when we appease them, we empower them. And so you're not empowering the progressive Muslims, the ones who are putting up rainbow flags in their mosques, or the ones that are saying that, women don't have to wear hijab or blah, blah, blah. They're a tiny minority, but they're not the ones that are being supported. The ones that are being supported and uplifted are the larger voting group, as you touched on, which is an incredibly important topic, especially in Canada, where Muslims are, in America, you're like at 1%, and they're still trying to be the tail that wags the dog, right?
Yeah.
In Canada, it's over 6%. So they're growing, right?
And that's where there's the Liberal Party in Canada is responding to the politics. I always tell people that's what we do here. Politics. Everything's politics. Never forget that. So you've got white progressives in Canada now, led by Trudeau, trying to show that they, want to have sort of an anti-Israel stance. That's not for no reason. They're not doing that because they suddenly have found the peacenik in their heart, or that they actually believe it. They're probably worried about the constituency, like London has.
You definitely are.
You have to attend to a and that, by the way, everyone deserves representation. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but it is cynical, isn't it?
It is absolutely. And if now that you bring up Trudeau, he is the most perfect example of a useful idiot.
Emphasis on the idiot. Without his last name, he's a pretty boy. I'm sure he'd be in magazine spreads or something, but that's about it. He's just useless. Useful and useless.
See that part.
Huh?
Honestly, I don't even see that part. I don't even get it.
Well, I don't think he has. I've never been impressed. I've never been impressed by anything. I just don't know what he is. There's a zero. It's a nothing.
Absolutely agree.
Well, we have that here, and again, if you are, especially if you were seen as liberal, and you're a man, you're feted as, oh, you're a hunk and you're a superstar. It doesn't matter what even though we have a lot of liberals like that in America.
Right.
They're lose elections, do nothing, achieve nothing. They are virtue signaling morons. And guess what they get? They get praise, even if they lose elections. So why don't we run, Beto O'Rourke? Well, he's lost 3 times. Okay. I don't have I don't like Ted Cruz, but this guy's not the guy. It's enough already. Okay. Yeah. So, it's the same kind of idea. Has this shaped your are you in Vancouver now? Is that where you are?
That's where I am.
Okay, you have to be careful about where you say.
I do have to,
I understand. No, don't worry. As I said, well, we have listeners. I don't know how many listeners are going to seek you out in that way, hopefully. Or they'll seek you out as a listener, but not as a manhunt. But how has this shaped your political thinking?
Well, you know what? Surprise, surprise, when you grow up in a very conservative, traditionalist, very what we would call right-wing religious home and ideology, you just run for the left.
Of course.
And you just feel like you just found yourself a safe haven, right? like like I was mentioning before, I was always looking towards like feminism,
Yeah.
equality, liberalism. Like it was just like this utopia, like, oh, one day, I'll get to, frolic amongst the free, and that's what I thought I was getting
Hmm.
when I escaped from one extreme and I ran headfirst into the left thinking I'm home. I'm one of you. We share the same values. I'm so happy to be here. And they were like, who the fuck are you? Basically, I felt nothing but betrayal. It was really, really sad. Now I'm also an agnostic atheist.
I was going to
And
ask what you think. But wait a second. When they say who the fuck are you mean who the fuck are you because you left Islam, or who the fuck are you because you're Muslim? What was what was the problem with? I mean, you fit the identity mold they want. So
yes,
what's the
but
problem?
I fit the identity, with, physically,
Right.
but I was not ideologically aligned. I wasn't saying what they wanted me to say. These were the days of like everything was Islamophobic.
Oh, right.
And here I am trying to tell my story and talk about my trauma and what I've been through. And nobody wants to hear it. In fact, they want me to stay quiet because it's embarrassing for them that they have this ex-Muslim in the midst. You know what I mean? It was like this dirty thing.
Right.
They can talk about, oh, I left Jehovah's Witness. Oh, I left Mormonism. Oh, I left Westboro Baptist Church. Oh, I left this, that, and the other thing. And they're all like, applauding them. And I'm like, I left Islam. And they're like, so anyway,
a world that's reduced to a reductive, stupid binary, right? Where race, gender, and everything else is on one side and everybody else is on the other as some kind of oppressor, leaves no room for the debate, for the nuance, because you weren't out of central casting. You're supposed to say that everybody in the West is a horrible colonialist and they're just out there to kill all the Muslims and occupy every country, which of course isn't true. As if there isn't a big, huge political, as you would say, radical movement among various terrorist groups to destroy so much of the West. I mean, it's a weird, again, back to what we said, it's they don't want to face that reality. And it's hard to believe they're putting their fear of bigotry. We never want to abide bigotry of any kind, but that your fear of a kind of intolerance of a bigotry, of a faith that could be bigoted too, is somehow supersedes all of your other principles. It's the mind. I hate all the catchphrases because I think they're cheap, but like the woke mind virus, as they say, it's a bizarre, and look, there's plenty of bad faith people, as you know, that hate Muslims and hate marginalized groups and hate blacks, gays, and all that stuff. But there's also a lot of people who I think are just tired of the balkanization of human beings into groups, way that leaves no room to really figure out who those people in those groups are. It's in service of the group. And so has this made you in many ways more small c conservative then?
No, I always call myself politically homeless.
Me
I'm
too.
a
Well, that's what I am.
centrist. I don't know what you want to call me, moderate. Yeah.
Yep.
But
You're a dirty moderate.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm unwanted. I don't want to be. Sorry, I do not want to be on the right, and the left don't want me there. And so here I am.
You're politically homeless like me. What can you tell as we wrap up here? What can you tell, though, people who are, the social justice warriors? You don't have to speak to people on the far right who aren't going to tolerate anybody. There's nothing to talk to. But for people in the middle, and especially people in the social justice left, please, listen up, folks. What can you say to them, Yasmine, that they need to hear? Because I want to play clips of this. Again, I have a lot of conservative listeners and I have a lot of conservative principles. I mean, no doubt, as a moderate, I certainly on markets and government and limited government, certainly not on social issues, but I'm certainly an agnostic / atheist, and I'm an equal opportunity offender with all religions. And I just will not tolerate or abide, some kind of religion as a death cult. I mean, that just is not going to fly. So what would you say to people?
I do want to say before I give my kind of final word that I can at least have conversations with conservatives. They're willing to have a conversation. We can agree, we can disagree.
Conservatives come on my show all the time.
Allowed.
People who are doctrinaire conservatives, we have a lot of them. We have a lot of people coming up. They've come on before, they'll come on. It's much harder for me to get real progressives because they don't want to have to defend anything. And I'm not here to gotcha. I do what I do with you, but they don't want to have to even explain why they believe it. And that's intellectually stunted, in my opinion.
Absolutely agree. But also they're very judgy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you can't disagree with somebody, but it's like, no, you're
my enemy. You're my Nazi. Right. Right. Well, I said, get ready for this campaign this year that every Republican's going to be called a Nazi when the youthful base of the Democratic Party are literally Hamas simps. I mean, they are. I mean, that's just what they're saying. They may not everybody knows what they're protesting, but the fact that and it's about time to look it up, kids, and people like that. Real quick. Also, do you think in light of what your view is and what you've experienced, and again, no two countries are alike. And of course, very interesting about it having an Egyptian and Palestinian upbringing, and how Egyptians viewed Palestinians. Do you actually think there could ever be a Palestinian state that will accept Israel, that would renounce terrorism, forget what else is going on? Do you think that's possible?
So
it's just an important question. I know
it's a big one because before October 7th, I would have had maybe a different answer. But October 7th obviously has changed everything and has made that question a lot more complicated and a lot more difficult. And, the day after this happened, I wrote a piece where I talked about my dad who passed away in 2019, who was always fighting for Gaza. He was never an anti-Semite.
No.
He had, Israelis were still living in Gaza when he was there. You know what I mean?
Right.
So he, that's the ironic thing here is Palestinians are actually the least anti-Semitic of all the Arabs and Pakistanis, like all the Muslim communities, because they've actually interacted with Jewish people. They've actually met Jewish people.
Yes.
So it's harder to convince them of this boogeyman evil thing when they've met Jewish people there, but it's much easier to do that in Egypt, Malaysia, Indonesia, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, everywhere else, where there used to be Jewish people in Yemen and Syria and Iraq and Morocco and Egypt, et cetera. But of course they were all kicked out.
They were expelled. Yeah, I know.
They were expelled. And so those countries haven't had Jewish people in them for decades. And so they don't know. They're talking about hate for people that they've never met. And it's easier to get them to hate Jewish people. Palestinians, on the other hand, are more interested in, I should say Gazans, because I don't know about people on the West Bank, but I can very, confidently talk about my family, my father's family. People in Gaza are more interested in just having peace in their homeland. If Hamas is the one that came in as their leaders, and it was a bloody coup when they came in, right?
They did, and they've been there for 17 years. It's not Israel does not occupy Gaza. I know they control the ports and the borders, absolutely. They do, but they did pull out of Gaza after all those years.
Yeah. And all of those areas where the Jewish people used to live and then they had to all leave and go into Israel just became Hamas training grounds. You know what I mean? Like it was just immediate. That was the plan from the beginning. And they ruined Gaza and they continue to ruin Gaza.
They do. And I do feel for the plight of the people there because the thumb has been on the scale forever.
Yes. They have been used as pawns in this global caliphate scheme, and that's why Iran is the one paying Hamas, the one funding Hamas in their terrorism.
Right.
And then they'll just go, even if Hamas is decimated, they'll move on. Iran will fund Hezbollah to try from Lebanon. You know what I mean? Like, this is a hydra. Hamas is just one of many, just like Al Qaeda, just like ISIS, just like Al Shabaab, just like Boko Haram. Like, they're all over. This is just the one that everybody's attention is on right now. Obviously, Hamas have been terrorizing the people of Gaza since they moved in, right? There were quite a few campaigns. One was just a couple of months before October 7th, where it was called "We Want to Live." And the Gazan people have been fighting against Hamas. They've been trying, but how do you fight against a terrorist organization as your government, right? This is their leadership. So it's very scary. It's very dangerous. It's very difficult, but they were trying to get their voices out all of these years. So Hamas have been terrorizing the people of Gaza for the longest time, but when it seeped into Israel, of course, and then they started terrorizing not just Israelis, in that music festivals, people from all over the world, terrorizing innocent people. Then the world started to take notice. But the people of Gaza already knew. They've known this. They've already known them to be terrorists all this time. And my dad's biggest thing that always bothered him so much that he always spoke about was how embarrassing it was for him. That when people thought of Gaza, they immediately thought of Hamas. He was so upset that the face of his homeland was this terrorist organization. And if he were alive and if he were to see all of these useful idiots all over the West talking about Hamas as glory to the martyrs they had in George Washington University, like projected up on a building, like all of this like absolute insane stuff, talking about how they are the resistance and they're revolutionaries and they're the freedom fighters. They are terrorists. They raped and mutilated women. They killed and kidnapped babies. What part of that is unclear? How are we having a discussion about this? Like this, that's not even.
Well, and to the point of this, and I'm happy to say it, and I'm not the only one who said it. When Japan attacked and killed 2,200 Americans at Pearl Harbor, what was this famous saying? They awakened a sleeping giant. There was just no way Israel wasn't going to level them, and that's the way it goes. That's it. Because 1,200 Jews massacred roughly on that one day was the equivalent of about 40,000 Americans. And if you looked at it from that angle, this is where, again, it becomes a cycle of violence, but Hamas were bloody terrorists before October 7th. There was a ceasefire on October 6th. Hamas had repeatedly broken them. I mean, to your father's point, to people's point, it's not as if this came out of nowhere. You can dislike Netanyahu as I do. You can think that some of the settlement policy in the West Bank is wrong. But none of that would change that the Hamas leadership's view of how they want Israel destroyed as part of a global caliphate. That's the problem. Correct. It's not like, hey, I'll give you this. I mean, to Egypt's credit, Israel gave back the Sinai Desert, and they've had a basically peaceful relationship, since the
politically, yes.
Politically,
Egyptians play the game, though, right? Just like Jordanians
do too, of course. Right. Yeah. I mean, but hey, you know what? If they were Israel's greatest foes and they were taking all the while taking lots of military action against them, if it's not going to be a war and they're going to, again, kind of a frenemy, that's okay. That's better than having people at your border coming over and raping your women and murdering your children.
Yeah. I will say, though, that the UAE is a lot more genuine in even Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia removed a lot of anti-Semitic hadith from the school books.
I heard.
That's huge.
Right.
And so those are real steps towards progress, not just lip service.
Yeah. And as you know, and as you've spoken eloquently about, and as your book talks about, all of this all the radical elements of the faith empower people from a young age onward to believe stuff that's part of a very, very, very dangerous worldview that keeps a lot of people oppressed and a lot of people held back. And listen, you wrote an amazing book and you're here to talk about it. I know you've appeared many where the book came out in 2019, right?
Yep, October 2019.
Yeah, I didn't have my show then, but that's why I wanted to have you now to talk about it in light of everything. And I'm excited to hear more from you as time goes on, because I think your voice is very, very, very needed. You're a true dissident, and that's fabulous, you know. And you're also a dirty moderate. But that I don't mean it lightly, but you are, yes, but you are courageous. Your tale is one of heroism, folks. The book is Unveiled: How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. Yasmine Mohammed, thank you for joining us, and come back and see us again. In the meantime, dirty moderates, stay dirty, stay moderate, and stay safe. Don't go anywhere.